synopsis, just a brief, let's take a peek. And we're going to come back on this right after a few messages here. But you need to visit us on the internet at www.islamtomorrow.com for a rebroadcast of this and other programs. And we'll be continuing in our next program. Until then, this is Yusuf Estes telling you Allah is the guide. May He guide all the seekers of truth to the real truth. Ameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And thanks for being on the show. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Abdullah Palmer is with us again, and we're on the second part of in the series of Izhar al-Haq, the book review of the books that were originally used by the famous debater of Christianity, which is Ahmed Deedat.
Correct.
And he's written some great works, and he based it on these books right here that you're looking at here. This is called Izhar al-Haq, the truth revealed. And as we already mentioned in the first parts of it, I won't bore you with that again, we listed a little bit of the introduction and what's going on with that. We gave you the names of the books of the Old Testament. Now we're going to jump in and talk about the New Testament, those books. And this will give you sort of an understanding of what's going on with these books. We're just touching on them a little bit so that you'll have some basic knowledge whenever you talk to people about it. So in the Old Testament, by the way, we found there were 39 books.
Correct.
Now that's based on what? Because we already ran into the problem that the Catholic Bible had 73 books. The Christian, or the Old Testament has 39 books, and the New Testament has
27 books.
27 for a total of 66. But the Catholic Bible has 73.
Yeah.
So it makes a problem. And so now we're going to look at the New Testament. Now this is based on the New Testament according to the Protestants. And they have what's called the Gospel of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And those are called synoptic because they follow the same what? Synopsis. And then we run into the Gospel of John. And the Gospel of John is a little bit different. It has a different tone and a different argument, the way it presents everything. And the first argument is about the period before and after the prophet Jesus, and it's a style of writing and a method of combining books similar to the style of the present-day Muslim writers. Okay, and it's not possible to refute the obvious evidence which the text itself offers unless strong arguments are presented to negate it. The second argument, this gospel contains the statement in 21:24, chapter 21, verse 24. This is the disciple which testifies of these things, and we know that his testimony is true, and that's describing the apostle John. This denotes that the writer of the text is not John himself. Because you can see, it says that unless he's saying, hey, this is true because I wrote it, that's kind of weird. And it leads us to guess that the writer was found some script that was written by John and has described the contents in his own language, making some omissions and additions to the contents. And by the way, this is from the scholars of the Bible.
Right. Okay?
Now, the third argument is in the 2nd century A.D. when the authorities refused to accept this gospel as the book of John, then Irenaeus, and by the way, who is Irenaeus? He's the bishop of Lyon, and had a celebrated Christian scholar. He was a well-known scholar from the year 130 AD through 184, and his books against heresy are very popular. The Latin translations of his books are still available, and that's according to the Encyclopedia Britannica. He's a disciple of Polycarp, not to be confused with Polycarp. The disciple of John was living. He did not make any statement gave those, so I would start laughing again, who refused to accept the book and did not testify that he heard Polycarp saying that this gospel was the book of John the Apostle. Had it been the book of John, Polycarp must have known it. It cannot be the truth that he heard Polycarp saying many secret and profound things which he related, but did not hear a single word about a matter of such importance. And it is even more unbelievable that he had heard it and then forgot, since we know about him that he had a great trust in verbal statements and he used to memorize them. And all that is talking about the book of John. Let's move on. And there are a number of other arguments, by the way. There's the fourth argument talking about the Catholic Herald, which was printed in 1884. The fifth argument that talks about the great scholar Bert Schneider, who said that the whole of the gospel, all of the epistles of John, are definitely not written by him, but by some other person in the 2nd century. Sixth argument, the seventh, the eighth, the ninth, And it goes on. Now, I recommend that you get a copy of the books and look at it for yourself. And if you can't do it, check us out online. We should have it published by the time you hear this, that you'll be able to see for yourself. Then the epistles in the Revelation. Now, the epistle to the Hebrews is the second epistle of Peter, second and the third epistles of John, the epistle of Jacob, etc. All of that becomes what? More argument amongst the scholars of Christianity. We're talking about Christian scholars here arguing about their own works. This is not saying that this came from Muslim scholars saying these things. This is from the scholars of Christianity. And earlier we spoke about the scholars of the Bible, of the Old Testament, and we find them in sharp argument amongst each other, proving and disproving the various texts that they're holding in their hands. A number of contradictions here going on and on and on and on, and ad infinitum. After a while, you begin to realize that all of the scholars for centuries and centuries and centuries have held different opinions about what the Bible is.
Right.
So I'm going to ask you now Abdullah Palmer with me now, a former discipler from the Church of Christ, one that people used to go to you and ask to have their sins forgiven, right?
No,
they had to tell you their sins.
Right.
Right?
Right, I would try to give them advice on how to not do that again.
On how to not know. So you're like a counselor, right?
Correct, kind of like that, right.
But you had to listen to all the trash first, huh?
Yeah, they had to tell me, that was the rule. They had to tell me all their sins.
Oh!
And to be honest with me. So.
Yeah, I guess you had an earful a number of times.
A few times, yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Wishing you weren't there.
Yeah. Sometimes. Well, a lot of times I don't know what to tell them. So.
Yeah. All right. Now, let me ask you this. When you were reading the Bible for yourself, did you ever come across verses or passages from the Bible that made you say, "What's that?"
Yes, I did.
Tell me. I want you to talk about that a little bit.
Okay, the first one that I ever came up with, and that's actually just when I was very young.
Okay.
And it was in Genesis chapter 32, I believe, where God supposedly comes down to earth, and he wrestles with prophet Jacob.
Yes, Jacob. That's right.
And you see, I was a Christian, so I did believe that God came down as a man. That was my belief, that Jesus was God. But I didn't understand why God lost the fight. When he wrestled Jacob. Exactly.
That makes Jacob a better God than God, right?
I figured you think God could take him. You know? Especially if you consider the fact Jacob was, his whole life story was he was running from his brother Esau.
Yeah,
he was afraid his brother Esau could beat him up.
That's a good point. I never thought about that.
But when God came, he could still...
Yeah, if he could whip God, why was he so afraid? Even after he whips God, he goes back and he's still afraid of his brother. He's offering all kind of peace offerings and lambs and right. Wives and kids, all kind of stuff to him, and sent people ahead of him just to see, if they would. That's amazing. You got a point.
Right. Then there were other things that, this is one of the things that bothered my parents a little bit. Is, we talked about it a little bit earlier in Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 1 through 4. It says, "Do not do as the pagans do." That's how it starts out in verse 1.
All right.
And it says, "The pagans chop down a tree from the forest, and then they bring it into their homes. And then they put screws into it to make it stand up straight like a palm tree.
Yeah.
And then they adorn it with silver and gold." And then in verse 5, it compares this act to pagan worship. And so, as a Christian, I knew, every December 25th, or before that, even before Thanksgiving sometimes, we would have a, Christmas tree in our house. And we did exactly that. We adorned it with silver and gold, put it up in that way. And then as I kind of studied other things besides the Bible, I found out there's a lot of pagan practices, such as Christianity and, I'm sorry, not Christianity, but Christmas and Easter also has a lot of different pagan practices within it. So I was wondering where the bunny came from and the eggs and things like that when I was a kid.
Did you learn?
I did, yes.
What did you find out?
Well, it was a fertility celebration.
It's exactly right. You know what the name of it was called? The Feast of Ishtar.
Feast of Ishtar.
It was called the Feast of Ishtar, and they had a goddess by the name of Ishtar. And what they used to do is to build this phallic symbol. You know what that is?
No.
It represents a male organ.
I see.
Oh.
Okay.
And they put this big post representing the male organ, and then they would walk around this thing or dance around it and so on without their clothes on. Okay? And it gets worse. And then these eggs represented fertility, and rabbits, which represent